This is Wish TV, your local news source. News 8 at 10 continues.
All this month, Wish TV has shared a host of stories where we provide an opportunity for progress and promote conversations. As the fight continues for equality and equity across the country, parallels can be found when looking at the history and current state of the Jewish community. News 8's Katira Winfrey sat down with the Indianapolis Jewish Community Relations Council as we continue our series, We Stand Together.
Pursuing racial justice across the board is a commitment 22 groups within the Indiana Jewish community is making by adopting its principles on racial justice and equity. Lindsay Mintz is the executive director of the Jewish Community Relations Council. She says the principles in part will provide support to the black community while helping amplify their voices, but will also require Jewish community members to educate themselves on racial inequities while petitioning elected officials to address a variety of disparities. For a community that's faced its own injustices and atrocities, this work needs to continue.
There's been a really long and storied history of cooperation between the Jewish community and black community here in the United States. And really the height of that cooperation was during the Civil Rights Movement, but even at the turn of the last century, members of the Jewish community were active in founding the Leadership Conference and founding NAACP. The Civil Rights Act was signed in the basement of the Religious Action Center, which is the movement for Reform Jews. There's this long history, yes. Mm-hmm. It has not always been, the Jewish community and black community haven't always been in lockstep. But Jews certainly have a sense of pride for being among, the largest group of supporters during the Freedom Riders, during the bus boycotts, and marching alongside Martin Luther King.
So it's just natural to kind of become or get involved in things as they stand now.
Well, I mean, our scripture, right? We share the same founding texts and scriptures. We are commanded to pursue justice, but we're also commanded to remember what it's like to be a slave and what the journey is to freedom. And that resonates. It's resonated with Jewish leaders over thousands of years, and has certainly resonated with our leaders today and black leaders today. So there is this core recognition of what we're sort of commanded to do, to plead for the widow, to clothe the naked, to advocate for the orphan, all of those things, that the social justice. But there's also an understanding that if there is not justice for all, then there's justice for no one.
Now, watching everything unfold with George Floyd and all the protests across the country, what's your thought process on just the magnitude of it all?
Well, we watch very closely, and we've been partnering with local leaders in the black community for 30, 40 years. The JCRC was at the table at the founding of the Race and Cultural Leadership Network, RCRLN, in the 80s. There was a group of Jewish and black women that met in the 80s and 90s called Dialogue Today. So we've had these relationships among leaders. And the JCRC has, the murder of George Floyd was not the first and will not be the last. And when you look through the statements that we've issued over the past 15 or 20 years, we have taken the time several times to decry and call out this kind of injustice. But this moment is big, and it's going to be more than a moment. It needs to be a sustained movement.
Is it shocking to see it, though, on this kind of scale? Or is this something that was just inevitable?
Well, I do think I think that this moment is incredibly bizarre with COVID. I mean, the JCRC had just facilitated a new program called JCRC Talks, where we were looking at how the pandemic was disproportionately affecting the African American community. And so understanding systemic racism, understanding that it permeates every sector of society, is something that those conversations we have been in. But seeing it hit this magnitude, seeing the marches continue every weekend, seeing cities actually step up and changing things, seeing, you know, the state of Mississippi changing its flags, you know, this is, there's going to be much during this time that I want my kids to look back on and be proud. And yes, they're going to shake their head and say, how did it take so long? But we're here and we're doing it.
And a lot of people are using this time to actually talk to their kids. A lot of times this has been a topic that people have maybe wanted to steer clear from. Is that something you're facing head on when you talk to your kids and young people in your life?
You know, the conversations around hate and bigotry are conversations that members of the Jewish community have learned to have with their kids. I mean, we are also at a time of increased anti-Semitism. The most violent expressions of anti-Semitism in this country happened in 2018 and 2019. We saw a really substantial uptick. You know, one thing that JCRC does is track incidents throughout the state of Indiana. So we know that families, more and more families, are dealing with this. And one of the things that we do is help young members of the Jewish community learn to stand up and speak out when there's an instance of not just anti-Semitism, but when they see bigotry, when they see injustice or discrimination. What does it mean to be an upstander and not a bystander?
And going forward, what advice do you have to people who might be tuning in to say, hey, look up how you can improve the state of the country. Look at what you can do to make things better.
Well, I think it's easy to feel overwhelmed and easy to feel like maybe there's not much that I can do. But everybody is on a different place on this journey. And so number one, I value wherever you are. If you are opening your eyes and just now starting to read, just now starting to listen, that's great. You know, keep doing it. If you've been on this path and on this journey for a decade and are ready to play a leadership role, I mean, there's a place for everybody. And every day somebody is interacting with somebody who's different from themselves, or ideally. I guess that's the first thing. Learning and modeling for your kids what it means to talk to somebody who's different, to ask a question. There are countless opportunities for you to step in to a moment and model what it means to be an ally, what it means to speak up. And of course there are ways like joining the marches, like finding organizations that you want to support philanthropically, like voting. I mean, voting, like filling out your census. All of these things are also part of making sure that, you know, society is accountable to us, the people.
Our We Stand Together series will continue this week on News 8 at 10, and you can see all of our profiles online at wishtv.com. Remember, you can also listen to our We Stand Together podcast anytime. Tonight's episode and others are found at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.
You're watching Wish TV, Indiana's only statewide TV news network.